The gates closed behind her with the sound of a tomb sealing. Stone met stone, iron met iron, and in that moment the castle that had been hers since birth, her father's halls, her mother's solar, the high tower where the banners snapped in the wind, was no longer hers to claim. She did not cry. Not when the guards refused to meet her eyes, or when the herald read the decree with a shaking voice. Not when her younger brother took the crown that should have rested on her brow. She turned, cloak snapping in the wind, boots striking the road that led away from the only home she'd ever known. One foot in front of the other, for as long as she could. The gate slammed shut behind her, and she flinched, but she continued on. The massive walls of the city faded behind her as day passed. Her once bright smile was now replaced by determination. She had no idea what her life would be now, but she understood it wasn't what she'd been raised to do. By nightfall, the green hills gave way to ash and stone. Her body ached, her mind unraveling in the most defeated way. Her hands trembled, feet sore and raw, the impending night chill seeping into her bones. She'd only been allowed to take with her what she could carry. A few small rations, a water jug, and her clothes, as fine as they were, would be no match for the endless nights in the wastelands. The wastelands were dead country, with no banners, no kings, and no mercy. The earth there was split and scorched, as though something ancient had once clawed its way out and never returned. Travelers vanished. Armies did not march there. Even the sky was thinner, stretched tight over a land that refused to be tamed. She should not have survived the first night. Huddled under an overhang of jagged rocks, knees tucked into her arms and pressed tightly against her body, she laid her head on her knees, and for the first time all day, she cried. Tears welled, and the dam of determination could no longer hold back. They poured out and down her cheeks without abandon, and her body trembled under the release. The wind turned cold and sharp, biting at the edges of her conscience, but the fatigue won, and she drifted to sleep. A sleep she wasn't sure she would wake from. For some reason, though, she couldn't let herself fall completely, and she drifted between the dream world and the waking world. A man, tall, black hair, tanned ivory skin, and muscular, with eyes undefined to this world. Flashes of fire, chaos, flames encompassing the world. The man walking through them untouched, unaffected. His jaw was stern, determined, as if he were searching for something. Her. She woke with a start, as the dawn eased the night from the sky. She stayed huddled until the day warmed, then crept out from under the stones. Black, scorched, uneven, hurt. She had no idea where she was going, only that she couldn't return. She examined the surroundings and decided she would travel in the direction of the sun rising. A renewal of the day, her mother had told her. The sun was the promise. There was again another day to do better, to be better. It was as fitting as anything. The day passed with the same quiet as the last, with only her thoughts, her dreams, her nightmares, her brother's cruel laugh, her father's empty face, devoid of any emotion, and her mother's memory. If she were still here, she would not have let any of this happen, she thought. The day again passed, and she found a nook under a ragged old tree that somehow was still alive, or at least hadn't fallen yet. The wind picked up and brought the same chill as the night before, and she tucked her knees tight. Tears came again, but this time they held more than the betrayal. They held her sorrow, the sadness of everything lost. The second night passed the same as the first. The same man appeared, the same chaos, the same fire and flames, but this time the man turned and looked at her. His gaze was fixed, boring into her soul, as if he were searching her nature now, instead of the landscape. He had found her, and was now determining if she was the one. By the third night, something changed. The fire found her. It burned without fuel, a low, molten glow nestled between shattered rock. Heat rippled the air. The smell was not smoke, but metal, old and dangerous. At first she was alarmed. She'd traveled so far into the wastelands and had reached the molten spoken of in stories meant to scare, which also meant now she was never to return. She settled into the crook near a vein of heat and relaxed, the warmth soothing her body and her mind. "You walk like someone who has never been hunted," a deep masculine voice said. She stood quickly and reached for her knife she barely knew how to use. From the shadows, eyes opened, golden, slit, reflecting firelight like coins held up to judgment. The eyes she'd seen in her dreams. She squinted, trying to examine them without moving. The man stepped forward out of the shadows. Tall, scarred, wrapped in dark leather, scored by heat and claw. His gaze lingered too long, sharp and knowing, as though he were looking at more than her torn cloak and bruised hands. "Turn back," he said, but his gaze betrayed him. "This land eats princesses." Her spine straightened. "I am no princess," she answered. "Not anymore." The air shifted. Heat rolled outward in a sudden, suffocating wave. The fire spiked from the cracks in the fractured landscape and flared high, sparks lifting like embers caught in a breath too large to belong to a man. She didn't flinch, but stood collected, calm and regal, all the traits befitting a queen. She was the one. He smiled, but not kindly. There was menace in it, but his eyes again betrayed him. "Good," he said softly. "Then neither am I." Behind him, something vast moved beneath the earth. The ground trembled, and for the first time since the gates closed behind her, fear found its way into her chest, not of exile, not of death, but of what she had just found. "Who are you?" he asked, his tone both sincere and rough. "No one," she said, and turned her face away, shame cresting her features. It wasn't fair. She'd been trained to be the next queen. She wasn't even sure what had happened exactly. One minute she was taking lessons on political measures, and the next she was stripped of her title, her inheritance, and her pride. People scoffed, laughed, and even threw rotten vegetables. She couldn't do anything but hold her chin up as her mother had taught her. If she were only still here. The man examined her, then stepped closer, his presence both commanding and comforting. She had no idea why, but there was something about him, dangerous, mysterious, but calming and enticing. He lifted his finger to her chin and turned her face to meet his. She gazed at him with her deep violet eyes and simple expression that neither showed fear nor regret. The man stopped, his heart suddenly shifting with a vibration he'd never experienced. "You're not afraid of me?" the man asked, his tone low and rumbly. She shook her head slowly as she digested the statement. Should she? She supposed she should be. She was in the wastelands. "Why are you here? In the wastelands? Alone?" the man asked. "I was exiled," she simply replied. There was no use fighting it. It was what it was. The word struck him harder than any blade. Exiled. Not banished in secret, not hidden away behind convent walls or married off to some distant lord. Exiled meant the gates had closed behind her, on purpose. It meant the crown had chosen another. The ground beneath his boots hummed, a low, restless pulse he had learned to ignore over the centuries. He did not ignore it now. "Exile is a death sentence out here," he said. "Slow if the land is feeling generous." She scoffed a mocking snort. "Then I suppose generosity has never favored me," she declared, ready to accept her fate at his hands. The fire bent toward her protectively, flames flashing in remembrance. He noticed the way the flames leaned, how the heat softened instead of scorched. Dragons did not yield to bloodlines. Fire answered power, not birth. And yet, he took another step. Close enough now, the quiet steadiness of her breath tickled his senses, the unbroken line of her spine, the confidence she held without even trying. Her gaze steady on his, waiting her fate. No fear, no regret, simply accepting. "You were trained," he said reverently, his tone intuitive, not questioning. Her eyes flicked up, violet catching gold. Surprised. His tone had shifted to awe instead of accusatory. "Yes." "To rule," he finished. Recognition as old as time and dangerous as the wrath of the elements curled in his chest. "Then someone made a mistake." The earth shifted beneath them, a warming rumble rolling through the stone. Far below, an ancient power turned in its sleep, scales scraping against the bones of the world. "Who are you?" she asked, still under his spell. He hesitated, then turned away, releasing her of his finger under her chin. "A monster," he said at last. "According to most maps." His gaze dropped to her hands, unmarked by sigil or ring, and something inside him tightened. "And you," he said quietly, "should not be here alone," he said, shoving his sudden need for her down and returning to his harshness. The fire flared again, higher, then settled. "Well, I am. So if you're going to kill me, get it over with. I'm tired, and I don't want to keep playing games." Her tone came out sharper than she'd expected, but there was a hint of pain and sadness that struck the man's heart. He growled under his breath, as this was not the way of the dragon. So why did this woman strike compassion in him? He was ruthless, not merciful. Half human, half dragon. Emberkin, as they were once called. Once, a very long time ago, his kind were a blessing to the world. Now they are a curse. "I am not here to kill you," the man said. "The elements will do that on their own." "Well, I'm still here, aren't I?" she said, her tone sarcastic, but he got the impression it wasn't directed at him. His mind surged into a flurry of questions that he couldn't answer, and his expression tightened. "Where do you come from?" "Elidel." "That is quite a distance from here." "That's why I feel the way I do." She found a rock and sat down, a sharp breeze whipping through her long blonde hair. The delicate dusting of freckles on her fair cheeks gave her a childlike flair to her otherwise mature and beautiful face. The fire again eased toward her, its warmth adding to their comfort, and its light bathing a gentle glow on her soft ivory skin. His guts tightened as he understood the fire had chosen her. It didn't leap or flare. It settled, as if recognizing what it had been waiting for. It claimed her. That should not have been possible. Fire bent to dragons, not the other way around, and never to humans. His jaw tightened. "Elidel does not exile its firstborn lightly," he said. "They bind their heirs to stone and blood, to law older than crowns." She didn't look at him. Her fingers curled loosely in her lap, dirt under her nails now, proof of the road she had walked. "They said the law was not meant for me," she said. He was right. She was a failure, a fraud, cast out. His anger flashed. Those were the same words spoken to him centuries ago. The pulse beneath the ground surged sharp and sudden, a dragon's heartbeat answering his own. Somewhere far below, the ancient powers drew a slow, deliberate breath. "Stand," he said. She frowned, but obeyed, rising from the stone with a stiffness she hadn't allowed herself to show before. The wind tugged at her cloak and whipped through her hair. With careful precision he reached out to the space beside her. The air shimmered, heat bending light, and for a breathless moment the world held still. Her eyes widened as he called the fire to his command. Her heart thumped, and her brain screamed she needed to run. but her heart was planted in his presence. The fire behind her flared, bright, fierce, then bowed low, embers spiraling around her ankles like a living thing at rest, then climbed her being with reverence as it connected with her soul. She breathed in a deep breath, and the energy sank into her bones, her muscles, her needs, her desires. His breath left him in a rough exhale. His senses heightened and exhilarated.
"You were not exiled,"
he said quietly. She looked up, violet eyes sharp despite the exhaustion. "I'm not sure I understand what is happening."
"You were released."
The word tasted wrong, dangerous, addictive. He turned away from her before the heat beneath his skin betrayed him, before the scales that lived under flesh took over.
"Whatever they told you,"
he continued, voice lower now, controlled with effort,
"it was not mercy. It was fear."
The ground trembled again, and stronger this time. She felt it too. Her posture shifted, instinctive, as though some buried part of her understood the warning before her mind caught up. "What are you?" she asked, not afraid, but steady. He turned and met her gaze fully.
"Someone who knows what happens,"
he said,
"when a kingdom casts out the wrong heir."
Behind him, far beneath the cracked earth of the wastelands, wings unfurled in the dark. The tremor did not fade. The ground split a handspan wide at her feet, heat rolling up through the crack like a breath drawn too deep. Runes, old, jagged, half erased by time, glimmered in the stone beneath the ash. He swore under his breath, a word in the old tongue, a dragon's curse.
"They began the rite,"
he said, voice tight now,
"and stopped it."
She stared down at the light bleeding through the earth, her heart pounding with recognition, a pull, as if something inside her leaned forward, reaching, propelling her to accept it, to call it, to embrace it. "They said I was unfit," she whispered, "that the crown rejected me."
"No,"
he said sharply.
"The crown did choose you, but not Eladel."
He stepped closer, heat radiating from him in waves he no longer tried to restrain.
"Eladel binds its rulers to the land,"
he went on.
"Stone, fire, blood. A queen does not rule by birth alone. She is claimed. The fire has claimed you."
Her breath caught.
"They exiled you before the binding could finish,"
he said,
"because once it did, they could never unseat you. But you were meant for something else."
The fire roared with obedience. She gasped as warmth flooded her veins, an awakening made manifest. The ground beneath her feet steadied. The wasteland itself braced around her like a shield. The dreams surfaced, the chaos, the fire, the destruction. "You weren't here by chance," she said slowly, lifting her eyes to him. "You were waiting." He didn't know why, but it was true.
"Yes,"
he answered.
"I was."
Her mind whirled with all the new information, but landed on his statement. Someone who knows when a kingdom has cast out the wrong heir. And her heart understood. He too had been cast out. The rightful heir. But to where? Eladel was the only kingdom of its stature, place, and wealth. His gold eyes were warm and inviting, but dangerous. The thin scar on his cheekbone was old, and his strong jaw was more predatory than safe, but he was as gentle as he was fierce. "Who are you?" she asked again.
"I told you, I'm a monster."
"You're not," she said, her tone gentle. "You are something, but not a monster." His gaze lingered on her with a complexity of emotions that made her wonder. He turned away, his scales underneath threatening to expose him. "Where are you from?" she asked. The man turned back to her, his gaze meeting hers. He hadn't spoken the words out loud in more than 2 millennia.
"You would not know. It no longer exists."
She stood quietly waiting for him to process whatever he was thinking. It was as if she understood, to a degree, but she didn't understand why. He breathed in a few deep breaths, then turned back to her.
Emberbron.
You mean the place of dragons?
How do you know about that?
I have seen it in dreams. The man stepped back, his eyes wide and his heart thudding against his chest. But how? How could she know anything about Emberbron? She was no more than 20 human years old. The ancient bond of dragon lovers sworn settled into his bones, his ember-marked one, his mate, lover, and ruler of his devotion. He took a step back. The idea threatened to tear his composure loose inside him. The air around his body shimmered, heat bleeding through restraint, the faint rasp of scales brushing against skin where they no longer fully obeyed him.
No,
he said, more to himself than her. She didn't flinch. I don't dream like other people, she murmured. They're not stories. They're more like memories I'm not meant to have. Mountains that breathe, spires of obsidian veined with gold, a city built around a heart of flame. Each word landed like a blow. He could smell it. Ash, ember, home. The deep volcanic warmth of a place that had not existed for 2,000 years, except in dragon song and grief. You walked the halls, she continued, voice steady, though her hands trembled now. You stand at a gate carved from living stone, and you kneel in oath. His control snapped. The ground buckled as he dropped to one knee without realizing it, claws tearing through leather, stone fracturing beneath his weight. Heat roared outward in a circle, but it bent around her, refusing to harm. Stop, he growled, jaw clenched, eyes blazing molten gold. You should not know these things. But I do. She stepped closer, carefully, her gesture loving. The wasteland sighed. It was tired of being cast out, of emptiness filled with the void of pain and sorrow. The fire surged inward, threading itself toward her chest, her spine, her blood. Symbols flickered across her skin for a heartbeat, too fast to read, too old to belong to any human script. She reached out and with a gentle finger lifted his face to hers. His body trembled. It ached. It surged. And for the first time in 2 millennia, a dragonborn looked upon a human and felt not dominance, not hunger, but allegiance. Draken bonded. Far beneath them, the ancient dragon spirit stirred fully awake, its presence rolling through the wastelands like a long-held breath finally released. She met his gaze, violet eyes alight. She was not afraid or confused. She felt it too, the bond, bound by fire, by will, by fate, by choice, by love. Show me who you really are, she said, her tone delicate but commanding. The instruction wasn't harsh, but endearing, reviving, and the dragon inside could no longer be held back. His transformation was smooth, centuries of practiced ease. Black scales rippled to the surface as his wings unfurled, his body fully morphing into the majestic beast. He shook out his wings with a shimmy, his scales tinkling like armor in winter, as he embraced his beast form. He leaned his massive head down toward her, and she smiled. She reached out and placed her hand on his face. He didn't pull away, as her touch was soothing and graceful, but more than that, it was possessive, as if she were his and he were hers. What is your name?
I have no human name.
Why?
I have not yet been named by a human.
Then I shall call you.
Do not name a dragon,
he cut in,
unless you are ready to live your life with that dragon. Dragons, once named, are destined to that human only.
Do you wish to remain unnamed? The dragon had no answer. Why would he not? She was his ember-marked one. Because he was the one exiled for his failure to. Because he had failed to protect. The thought tore through him like a blade dragged backward through memory. because when Emberbron burned, he had stood at the heart of it. Wings spread, fire unleashed, but too late to stop the betrayal. Too late to save them, because he had survived when he should not have, because exile had been kinder than remembrance. The dragon lowered his head until one molten golden eye filled her vision.
"I was sworn,"
he said, his voice no longer human, no longer singular. It rolled like thunder through stone.
"Sworn to guard life, sworn to stand when the sky fell, and I failed."
Her hand did not leave his scales. The wastelands stilled, as if the world itself leaned closer. "You didn't fail," she said, her tone breathy and delicate. "You survived. You were destined for me." The words struck deeper than fire ever could. He shuddered, massive, terrible, beautiful, and a low sound escaped him. A sound between a growl and a broken breath. No one had ever said that to him. Not in 2,000 years of ash and solitude. She understood she was his, and he was hers. She understood the bond, the ember mark, the mark of the dragon mate.
"You are human,"
he said, though the certainty wavered.
"And yet—"
"And yet," she finished, stepping closer still, her forehead resting against the broad ridge above his eye, utterly unafraid. "You know me." His fire answered, the pull ancient and irrevocable. Not command or domination, but choice. Naming was not ownership, it was commitment.
"If you speak my name,"
he warned, voice low, reverent now,
"your fate and mine will no longer walk separate paths. Dragons do not belong. We bind."
She closed her eyes. "I have lost everything that was meant to define me," she said. "My crown, my home, my future as they wrote it. If my life is to be bound, then let it be bound to truth. To you, my Emberkin lover." Her eyes opened, steady, luminous, awake. "I will not name you as a queen," she said. "I will name you as a woman who chooses her mate." Silence fell, heavy, sacred. The dragon bowed his head fully this time, ancient neck lowering until his brow touched the earth before her feet.
"Then speak,"
he said. Fire coiled around them with an ancient ceremonial flare, as if the world remembered things it had long ago been forced to forget. Runes danced in and around the flames with intention, denoting the rights and permissions of Emberbron, the magical, mystical, and ancient place of dragons, choosing its king and queen. Far away, in the halls of Elidel, the stones of the throne room cracked, because a name, once spoken, would mean the mother of dragons had not merely returned, she had begun. The fire in the cracked earth was instantly sucked back into the depths with a crack that ricocheted off the surrounding jagged rocks. She stepped back, her heart pounding, and the dragon rose, scanning the distance. A cold vibration eased over them, and they shivered.
"We have been found. We must leave,"
he said. "Where? By whom?" she asked.
"Those that hunt you."
"Hunt me? Why? I have already been exiled. Who wants to hunt me?" she asked. Then she understood. It was her brother, the one who stole her crown. He didn't just want her exiled. He wanted her dead. Anger bristled in her chest, and she looked around. The landscape was endless. Nowhere to hide, at least not for long. The barren ground would make for a short life if the lightning storms didn't get to her first.
"Climb on,"
the dragon said. She hurried to his side, and he lifted her with his wing as she stuck her leg out to straddle his broad neck. She lay close to his warm body, and the dragon lifted off the ground with a gentle shove, but beat his wings fiercely against the air, lifting his massive body into the air. The soldiers on horseback, a small army, rounded the bend of a ragged rock formation in time to see the black silhouette flash across the bright moon that had now overtaken the sky.
"What was that, Your Highness?"
a soldier asked.
"I don't know,"
the new prince-elect said.
"What do you want us to do?"
Another soldier asked.
Find her!"
he roared.
"Yes, sir."
The soldier kicked his horse and lurched into a gallop as the rest followed. Back at the castle, the king stood in front of the fire blazing in the large fireplace that nearly filled the wall. The room was cozy for its size, with shelves of books and a large wooden desk in the center. The ceiling-to-floor windows, draped with heavy tapestry, accented the rear wall with an elegance that spanned the eons of time. He sipped the brandy in his crystal glass as he rubbed the back of his neck. Had he been wrong, exiling his daughter to make his son the king? It wasn't done. It wasn't the way. Elidel held strong oaths to the order. The firstborn was always the next ruler, regardless of gender. It was the Treaty of the Dragons, a long-held sanction that forged the unity between them and the beasts. But he had gone against tradition, against the rules, against the treaties, against the dragons. His son was strong, smart, vibrant, and commanding. He certainly could rule a kingdom, but he was ruthless. He had no mercy, no compassion. It was why the humans fought the dragons long ago, and lost, a monumental sacrifice of the humankind. The king lowered the glass slowly, the crystal catching firelight, as if it too hesitated.
"The Treaty of Emberkin."
He had not spoken the words aloud in years. They were carved into the bedrock of Elidel long before the first crown was ever forged, before thrones, before dynasties, before men learned to lie convincingly enough to call it politics. Dragons did not kneel to kings. They bound themselves to balance, to heirs who could carry fire without becoming it. They had begun the binding ceremony, but stopped it at his son's demands, and he had broken that balance. The fire in the hearth snapped sharply, a sound too close to a roar. Outside, the wind rose, unnatural, sudden, rattling the tall windows as if something vast had passed too near the towers. The king stiffened, every old lesson clawing its way back to the surface.
"When the air bends and the flame answers, a dragon has taken wing," he thought.
His son's voice echoed in his memory, cold and certain.
"Exile is mercy, father."
"No," the king murmured now, his hand tightening around the glass.
"Exile is fear. Exile is war."
Far above the barren wastes, the wind rushed. She clung to the dragon's neck as the air tore past them, her fingers curling instinctively into the grooves between his scales. Below, lightning fractured the clouds, illuminating the wasteland in violent flashes. Jagged stone, broken earth, the distant scatter of torches that already hunted where she had stood moments before.
"They ride with trackers,"
the dragon said over the rush of wind.
"Bound hounds, steel laced with runes meant to bleed fire."
Her breath hitched. "They prepared for this?"
"Yes,"
he replied grimly.
"Your brother does not hunt what he does not believe exists."
The cold vibration returned, stronger now, rippling through his wings.
"They know the treaty still holds," he went on, "and that if you live long enough to be claimed, Elidel will answer to dragons once more."
She lifted her head, pressing closer to him as another bolt of lightning cracked too near. How? How did her brother know this? "Then take me where they can't follow," she said, her tone both commanding and loving. The dragon angled sharply, wings folding enough to plunge them through a bank of storm cloud. Thunder swallowed them whole. Rain lashed at her face. The sky became nothing but sound and motion.
"There are places even kings have forgotten. Sanctuaries older than crowns."
"And Emberkin?" she asked, the words torn from her by the wind. He did not answer at first. And when he did, his voice was reverent and afraid.
"If Emberkin still lives, it will wake for you."
Below them in the heart of Elidel, the fire in the king's chamber guttered violently, then flared violet, an impossible color that had not burned in those halls since the last dragon oath was sworn. The king staggered back.
"Oh, no,"
he breathed. Somewhere deep in the city's floors, the relics of time shifted, stone grinding against stone, as a city long thought silent remembered. The mountain rose like bones of the world. Wind tore at them as the dragon climbed higher, thinner air biting cold against her cheeks. Clouds fell away beneath them, leaving only moonlight, stone, and the endless black drop below. At last he angled sharply toward a sheer cliff face that looked solid until the rock opened. He slipped through the narrow cleft, barely wide enough for his wings. Inside, the world changed. Warmth replaced the cold. The roar of wind faded to silence. The cave opened into a vast chamber lit by veins of glowing mineral threaded through the stone like captured starlight. Crystals caught the light from his breath, scattering gold and ember across the walls. He landed carefully, lowering to the ground like a prayer, letting her off. She slid down from his neck, her legs trembling from the long-held tension finally loosening. She steadied herself with one hand against the stone. "This is where you live?" she asked quietly.
"It is where I remember myself,"
he replied. He shifted, scales flowing like liquid shadow, wings folding inward as bone and fire reformed into flesh. When he stood before her again as a man, the heat remained, clinging to him like a second skin.
"You are safe here,"
he said. She looked around, taking in the ancient stillness the way the mountain itself seemed to breathe. The man standing before her was different now, a dragon and a man, a nameless being she was intrinsically connected to. She was certain she would name him, but for now she would get to know him, and he her.
"Let me show you around,"
he said, suddenly feeling more exposed. She smiled, and he held his hand out to her. She slipped her hand into his, interlocking her fingers around his, and her blood thumped. It was the most natural thing to do, and the scariest. She'd barely met this man, this dragon. Dragons didn't exist, yet here he was. Here she was, in a mountain cave hundreds of miles above the world below. He led her into his living quarters, a wonderful mix of humanity and beast. She got the impression he spent most of his time as the beast, but his care for his humanity was also deliberate. He watched her take it all in, the way her gaze lingered on the stone shelves carved by claw rather than chisel, on the furs laid carefully near the fire pit, on the weapons set aside, not as trophies, but as memories. Nothing here was excessive, nothing was careless. "You live simply."
"I live deliberately,"
he corrected gently.
"There was a time when excess and greed cost us everything."
He released her hand only to move ahead, brushing his fingers along the wall. At his touch, faint lines of warmth bloomed in the stone, veins of ember light waking as they recognized him. The chamber brightened enough to soften the shadows.
"This was once a watch eyrie, long before I came here alone. Dragons and humans both passed through these mountains then."
Her step slowed. "You weren't always alone?"
"No."
His voice was even, but the word carried weight.
"But solitude is easier than mourning."
She understood the depths of his loss and didn't press. She turned toward a low archway that opened into a narrower passage. Beyond it, she glimpsed something unexpected. Books, carefully wrapped scrolls, a simple table worn smooth by use. "You read?" she said, surprised. A corner of his mouth lifted.
"Dragons remember in fire. Humans remember in ink. I refuse to lose either."
She crossed the threshold, fingers trailing over the spines of the books, as if reassuring herself they were real. Histories, treaties, languages both living and dead. He had not merely hidden himself from the world. He had studied it, guarded its memory while it forgot him. "This place isn't just a refuge. It's a keeping."
"Yes,"
he answered.
"And now you understand why I brought you here."
She turned back to him, the mountain's quiet pressing closed around them. The distance between their bodies was suddenly intentional, fragile. "You're not hiding from the world. You're waiting for the right moment to return to it." Something unreadable passed through his eyes. Pride, perhaps, or the echo he had once been and dared not to be again.
"Careful,"
he murmured.
You see too clearly." She stepped closer, enough to feel the heat beneath his skin. "I was trained to read people and places. This mountain still listens to you."
"And you?" he asked quietly. "What do you listen to?"
She looked to the strange steadiness in her chest, to the sense that nothing about this was accident or escape. "I listen to what feels true. And this feels like the beginning of something I don't yet have words for." His breath slowed.
"Stay with me,"
he said, before he thought he shouldn't. She smiled and held out her hand to him, and he took it in his. "I will," she said, her features shifting to admiration, and what he hoped was a love that would last the rest of time. Outside, the wind shifted, curling protectively around the mountain. Inside, among stone and ember, and quiet understanding, two exiles stood at the edge of something neither had planned for, but both were ready to choose. Time passed differently in the Eyrie. Days, perhaps weeks, measured not by bells or courts, but by light shifting across stone, and the slow rhythm of shared meals, shared silence, shared laughter. He taught her how to walk the narrow ledges without fear, how to feel the mountain beneath her feet. She taught him how to sit with another presence without scanning for threats. Sometimes he left in the early hours, returning with the scent of snow and sky clinging to him. Sometimes he stayed, and they spoke of small things, her lessons as a child, the way she had memorized law by firelight, the sound of the castle at dawn, his childhood, her coronation, his kingdom. At night, the cave cooled. She slept near the fire he coaxed from stone, wrapped in a cloak far too large for her. One night, without ceremony, he lay beside her, not touching, but close enough that his warmth chased the cold from her bones. She did not move away. In the quiet, her fingers brushed his wrist, tracing light circles on his skin. He was the most amazing creature she'd ever seen, ever spent time with, and her heart was deeper and deeper connected to the ancient magic within him. He turned his head slightly, their faces close, breaths mingling. He moved his hand to hers, and she let his fingers wrap around hers. She released a deep breath and settled into his touch. What he was really saying was that he wanted her, all of her naked skin on his, her lips on his, their bodies entwined in passion and oneness. She understood him. She wanted it too. She ran her finger down his bare chest, and his eyes rolled into the back of his head with invigoration. The fire between them, the fire of the dragon, the fire of the woman, the fire of the earth, the fire of the realm, all wanted their union. He gazed at her. She was beautiful, her features striking, delicate yet fierce, and the bond surged. He understood it the instant she did, not as hunger, not as instinct, but as alignment. Dragons took, kings claimed, but what stood between them now was not conquest, it was invitation.
"You know what you're asking,"
he whispered, his voice roughened by restraint rather than desire. She scooted closer, closing the space herself, her presence warm and certain. "I am not asking to be taken. I am choosing you." His hand lifted slow, deliberate, and brushed a loose strand of her hair back from her face. The contact was barely there, yet the fire answered all the same, humming low through the stone and bone and blood. For a moment, the world narrowed to breath and heat and the unspoken truth that neither of them was whole alone. He drew her into him fully, arms firm and sure, and she fit as though the space had always been shaped for her. When his lips found hers, it was a vow without words. The fire brightened. They did not rush. They let the moment deepen until it no longer needed language. She embraced his touches with the desire of a woman in need, and he offered his as a man protecting what was his. Their shared intimacy warmed the cave with a forged connection older than time and deeper than the mountains itself. As her body heated and her wants took over, she whispered his name. "Valduin," she whispered. The name settled into the stone like a living thing. Her voice wrapped the name in breath, want, trust, and the mountain answered with a low, resonant hum, as if the area itself acknowledged what had just occurred. He went utterly still. "Say it again," he murmured, his need rising. She lifted her face to his, eyes bright, steady, unafraid of what she had awakened. "Valduin." The fire changed. It no longer licked or flared. It anchored, deep, steady, eternal. He drew her closer, his passions more intense, his breath uneven now, not with desire alone, but with the weight of what naming meant. "I have been named. I am yours, and yours alone," he declared through heavy breaths. Her thumb traced the line of his jaw, reverent and seductive. "What do I call you?" "What name do you give me?" "It is not necessary for a dragon to name a human." "But I want to be named by you, not as a dragon, but as your mate." Valduin smiled. "Brene." The name drifted off his lips like the breeze, and she smiled as his name for her settled into her chest. They let the moments pass as fire and nature returned to the cohesive balance it should be. Above them, the wind curled closer, sealing the airy in quiet warmth. Below them, the world continued on, oblivious to the moment when an ancient name was returned to purpose, not through prophecy or blood alone, but through intimacy freely given. In the darkness of the castle halls, her father sat in his sizable armchair, nestled into the comfort it once offered. But now, all he could feel was dread, the dread that he had made the worst mistake of his life, and it would cost him greatly. The brother rampaged through the halls, madness taking over his every thought. He couldn't figure out why she wasn't in the wasteland. His army had scoured every inch, and she was nowhere to be found. It was one thing to have her exiled, but she remained alive. He could feel it, sense it. His dreams continued to darken. With each passing night they came more intense, more lucid. Evil, gnawing, his once held desires to rule the kingdom were fading under the madness taking root. "I have to kill her. To keep the crown mine, I can't let her win," he declared into the silence. There was no one around to hear, but that didn't stop him. He secured his sword at his belt and left the room with a sturdy gait. The silence did not answer him, but something listened. The king remained seated long after his son's boots thundered down the corridor, the echoes fading into the stone like a closing wound. The fire before him burned too high, too hot, as if it shared his unease. He did not look into it. He had learned long ago that fire sometimes looked back. "She lives," he whispered, the words heavy with both relief and terror. He pressed his hands to his chest, to the place where the old treaty sigil had once been inked and burned into his skin during his coronation, now faded, nearly gone. The dragons had demanded truth from their kings then, balance, mercy, continuance, and he had broken it, not for ambition or hatred, for fear of what his daughter was becoming. In another wing of the castle, the brother descended the stairs 2 at a time, his grip tight at the hilt of his sword, as if it were the only thing anchoring him to himself. His breath came sharp, his thoughts jagged. Every shadow seemed to move too slowly. Every torch burned too dim. The wastelands devoured the weak. They broke the proud. They left nothing behind. And yet he could feel her, not as warmth, not as love, but as pressure, as though the world itself were quietly leaning away from him. He paused in the corridor, hand braced against the wall, a sudden wave of dizziness crashing through him. For a moment he saw it again. Fire raining from the sky, a woman standing unburned at its center, wings behind her that were not her own. He snarled, shaking his head violently. "No," he hissed. "You're gone. You're nothing." But the visions did not stop. They now tortured him in his waking hours. The bags under his eyes didn't lie. Sleep never came, which only added to his insanity. The brother collapsed to his knees in the dark of his chamber, clutching his head as images slammed into him unbidden. A battlefield not of this age, dragons falling from a burning sky, a woman screaming a name he had once known and hated. "No," he gasped. "I am king. I won." But the vision did not care for his certainty. It pressed closer. In the depths beneath the oldest mountain range, deeper even than Emberbron's ruins, stone shifted against stone. Runes dulled by centuries flickered faintly, reacting not to fire, but to bond. A presence stirred, not dragon, not human, a force that remembered when both had first learned to fear one another. The brother's heart sank with his true nature, a dragon slayer. His body heated, and his soul rejoiced. That's what all the dreams and visions had been telling him, to become the slayer, a force powerful enough to rid the world of the demons who once destroyed it. He turned on his toe and hurried toward the military barracks, flicking his hand to signal for the men to follow him. The days passed with fury. Attack plans, army readiness, fortress preparations. The king looked out over his city, a once peaceful place thriving on goods and services, now plagued with the preparations of war. An idea he could not hold back. It was his fault. He'd allowed it to happen, and now he had to live with his consequences. He turned his attention to the distance. Deep in the clouds across the sky was the answer. He was certain the dragons had heard his betrayal. They would come. They would destroy. They would consume. It was only a matter of time. No sacrifice would be enough. No fair maiden, no gold, silver, or jewels would suffice. He'd sealed their fate. His knees weakened, and he steadied himself against the cold stone of the arched window. The breeze stiffened, cold and unforgiving. Tears streamed down his face as his heart thumped in his chest. The mark on his chest, once a symbol to remember, now gone. High in the mountains, the heir slept in a rare and gentle stillness. The fire burned low, steady as a heartbeat. Curled close together, wrapped in warmth and quiet certainty, they rested, unaware of the storm tightening its grip on their kingdom below. Falduin woke, drifting from a slumber he hadn't had in decades. He sat up slowly, every instinct alert, the dragon beneath his skin stirring uneasily. Something had shifted, subtle but wrong. A thread tugged taut somewhere far away, thin as memory but sharp as a blade. Brene stirred beside him, brow furrowing even in sleep. He looked down at her, at the woman who had given him his name and bound his future without chains. "Soon," he murmured, more promising than warning. The mountain did not answer, but the fire flickered like an eye opening in the dark. And far below, a prince taunted a sister he could not find. A king mourned a choice he could not undo, and a realm unknowingly drew closer to the moment when truth would no longer remain hidden. Not because destiny demanded it, but because love, once named, does not stay silent forever. Behind him, she woke slowly, warmth lingering where his presence had been. She sensed it too. Not fear, not danger, but attention. "Something has changed," she said, her voice low with residual sleep.
"Yes,"
he answered.
"And not only for us."
Falduin stood and walked to the mouth of the eyrie, the wind pulling at his dark hair, his senses stretched far beyond sight or sound. The fire within him had tightened, coiled, like a blade drawn slowly from its sheath.
"He has remembered,"
he said quietly. Brene stepped beside him. She wrapped her arm around his bare chest and leaned her face on his warm back. The stone cold beneath her bare feet, the vast sky opening endlessly before them. "My brother?"
Yes.
Falduin's jaw set.
What he was before he was your brother.
Her breath caught, his dragon understanding sinking into her mind. The truth settled heavy and inevitable, like a piece of a story snapping into place. A slayer. Falduin nodded once.
Forged to kill what could not be ruled. Raised to believe fire was corruption rather than balance.
She looked toward the distant clouds, where the world blurred into pale gray. Then he will come?
Yes, and he will believe himself righteous.
Behind them, the fire stirred, restless now, no longer content to sleep. The mountain itself listened, old stone remembering the sound of war boots and dragon cries alike. He won't stop.
No,
Falduin agreed. He turned to her, his gaze steady, unflinching.
But neither will we.
The wind surged, sharp and cold, snapping against the cliff face. Far below, unseen and unheard, armies drilled and blades were sharpened. Old roles were reclaimed, old mistakes prepared to repeat themselves. She placed her hand over his heart. The deep, resonant heat beneath his skin and bone sank into her senses. Then we do this differently, not as a slayer and beast, not as king and exile. He covered her hand with his own.
As choice.
The fire answered with resolve.
You have a kingdom to restore.
What if I don't want it?
What do you want?
To be with you. Falduin gazed at her, his heart thumping hard. Is that a bad thing? Falduin shifted so he could see her, and her bright gaze sank into his mind.
No, but it's not a simple path.
As long as we're together. He cupped her face and placed his lips on hers. Their kiss was simple, but filled with passion and unspoken words.
Your brother will not stop. His greed has overtaken him.
Brene sighed. Then we must rid the earth of him.
Are you sure you can?
I must. I have no choice. It's either him or us, and I choose us. Falduin studied her for a long moment after the words settled between them, heavy and irrevocable. The mountain did not interrupt. Even the fire held still, as if listening for what came next.
You speak like a queen already.
She opened her eyes. There was no softness there now, no hesitation, only clarity. I never stopped being one. He nodded once, acceptance, not approval. Dragons understood resolve when they saw it.
We leave before dawn. I will take you as far as the low ridge. From there, we move as commoners, quiet and watching.
She moved to his side, slipping her hand into his again, grounding them both. And when he comes for us? A faint, dangerous smile curved his mouth.
Then he will learn what he forgot.
The fire brightened, not flaring, not raging, ready. Far below, the roads of Elidel carried soldiers, and whispers in equal measure. The brother sharpened his blade with reverence, convinced he was answering a calling older than Quilt. The king knelt alone in a quiet chamber, feeling the absence on his chest where an oath once lived, knowing that the balance he had broken was finally moving to correct itself. High above it all, dragon and queen turned from the safety of stone and flame toward a world that no longer remembered how to face them. Falduin shifted, his scales emerged, wings unfurled, head morphed, and tail elongated. He was magnificent. Brene ran her hand along his majestic, muscled body, and he shivered with the touch. Her touch. He lowered a wing, and she climbed onto his back. She settled into the crook above his wings, and he looked back at her. His yellow eyes pierced the gray of the atmosphere. She nodded once. Then he turned and leapt into the vast expanse, opening his wings, catching the wind underneath. He soared through the sky with ease and skill, descending the heights delicately, then pounded the wind with his wings and thrust themselves onward. Brene held on, but their bond held magic that kept her tight to his body no matter his movements. Safe and secure, The world was so much larger than she'd ever known before, and her mind opened to new possibilities.
"There are more cities than yours,"
Falduin said. I didn't know.
"Yours was tucked into the mountains, hidden by the wastelands."
What happened?
"I burned it all."
The words fell between them like ash. The wind tore past them, cold and clean, but the heat beneath his scales tightened. "Why?" she asked, her voice steady, despite the drop beneath them. Falduin angled his wings, banked them along the spine of the mountains, so the world tilted, and then smoothed again. When he spoke, it was not the voice of a dragon boasting over ruin, but the voice of a survivor confessing truth.
"Because it had already fallen. Because it had become a forge for weapons meant to end us. Because the city I loved chose fear over balance."
Below them, valleys unfolded, rivers like silver thread, clustered lights of towns tucked into green folds of land, roads winding like veins through a living body. The world was vast, thriving, so much more than the single kingdom she had been raised to believe was the center of everything. I thought the world ended at our borders.
"It does,"
he replied gently.
"For those who never leave them."
She rested her palm against the warm ridge of his neck, the steady power there, the restraint beneath it. "Do you regret it?" He was quiet for a long moment.
"I regret that I was alone when I chose."
The bond between them hummed, soft, reassuring, and present. She leaned forward, pressing her forehead briefly to the base of his crest, an unspoken promise carried on breath and trust. "You won't be alone again." Falduin lifted higher, wings beating strong and sure, carrying them out of the mountain shadows and into open sky. Ahead, the land sloped downward, toward the lowlands, and beyond them, past rivers and fields, and the narrowing distance to Elidel, choices waited that would shape more than a crown. As the sun broke through the clouds, Brene lifted her face to the light. "Show me." The dragon flew on, toward a future neither of them intended to burn.
"We shall see the world together soon, but first we must stop your brother."
Brene agreed and let her mate carry them toward uncertainty. The lowlands came into view, and Falduin landed not far from the main road, but out of sight for his transformation. "They'll recognize me," Brene said. Falduin bent down and picked up some dirt, smudged it on her cheeks and nose, and with a smile, he said,
"There, now no one will recognize you. But keep your hood on."
Brene smirked, but smiled in return. They proceeded on foot the rest of the way, hand in hand, heart on heart. The main gate emerged, and the people grew thicker. They traversed the onslaught of commoners, hurrying to buy supplies, sign up for the armies, and make preparations for war. It had only been a month since her exile.
"How quickly humans forget,"
Falduin said. Brene understood him. As an Emberkin, half dragon, half human, and 3 centuries old, humans were a fragile race. If not for his dragon nature, he too would have vanished into the depths of time. But he was here, now, again. Brene reached out and slipped her hand into his, grounding him, and he smiled with her touch.
"Dragons are going to attack. We must hurry to defend ourselves,"
a townsman said as he and his kin bristled past. Falduin's step slowed slightly.
"Fear travels faster than truth."
Brene watched the townsman disappear into the press of bodies, her gaze moving over the surrounding faces, tight with worry, flushed with urgency, eyes darting skyward as if flame might fall at any moment. "They're afraid of what they don't understand. And my brother knows exactly how to use that."
"Yes, slayers always did."
They moved with the crowd now, blending easily, no banners, no guards clearing paths, just another pair pulled along by rumor and dread. But where others rushed blindly, Brene listened. She felt the pulse of the city beneath her feet, the way tension gathered like a storm waiting to break. They reached the shadow of a stone archway and paused, letting the flow of bodies carry on without them. Falduin leaned in enough that only she could hear him.
"If he has convinced them dragons are coming, Then he intends to become their savior when the threat is slain."
Brené's expression hardened. "By killing you?"
"And anyone who stands with us."
She drew a steady breath. "Then we don't confront him in the streets. We go where lies begin."
"The court."
"Yes. Before he turns fear into law." A sudden shout rose from farther down the road, steel clashing as recruiters began drilling fresh volunteers right there in the open street. The sound rang sharp and wrong against the stone. Falduin's hand tightened around hers.
"We're running out of time."
Brené lifted her chin, eyes fixed on the distant rise where the castle towers cut into the sky. "Then let's remind Elidel who it truly belongs to." Together they stepped back into the crowd. The bells began to ring, a sharp, frantic peal reserved for siege and fire. The sound rippled through the city, cutting through voices and panic alike. Falduin's head lifted instantly, eyes narrowing.
"So it begins,"
he mumbled. Brené understood it too. The way the sound was timed, measured, too controlled, calculated, and sure. A shout rose near the square.
"The Prince-elect speaks!"
People surged toward the central steps where a hastily erected platform stood before the inner gates of the castle. Soldiers formed a disciplined ring, more theatrical than defensive, polished armor catching the light. At the center, her brother stepped forward. Calm, commanding, unafraid.
"My people,"
he called, his voice carrying easily over the crowd.
"Dark rumors have reached your ears. I stand before you to say this. Elidel will not fall to monsters."
Cheers broke out, raw with relief. Brené's nails bit into her palm. Falduin leaned close.
"He's setting the stage."
Her brother raised a hand, silencing the crowd with practiced ease.
"I have ridden with our armies. I have consulted ancient records, and I swear to you, if dragons yet live, they will find no prey here."
The crowd roared with approval. Behind them, in the shadow of the inner gate, a woman stood still, older, plainly dressed, a servant perhaps, but her eyes were sharp, fixed not on the prince-elect, but on Brené. Recognition flickered, then shock. The woman turned away as if she had seen nothing at all. Brené's breath caught as her new intuition, now shared with the dragon, surfaced. Someone knows.
"Yes, and chose silence."
"That's good, right?"
"Not always."
Brené frowned, and he squeezed her hand in his with reassurance. On the platform, her brother continued, his voice rising with confidence.
"I will hunt this threat myself,"
he declared.
"I will do what my predecessor could not. I will keep you safe, even if it means standing alone against ancient fire."
The lie rang loud and clean. The weight of the spin settled into her bones. If she stepped forward now, they would not see a queen returned. They would see a traitor who had brought the monster to their gates. Falduin's hand tightened around hers, grounding and steady.
"Say the word,"
he murmured,
"and I will burn lie to ash."
She looked at the people, her people, faces twisted with hope and fear and belief. "No," she said softly, "not yet." Her gaze sharpened, resolve crystallizing. "We let him finish building his false crown. Then we take it apart, stone by stone." The bells rang on. But the woman in the shadows had already done the unspeakable. Two towering soldiers, loyal to the prince-elect, gripped Brené's shoulders tightly, digging their grubby fingers into her.
"Shh! If you want to die a pain-free death, come with us,"
one of them barked. Falduin's blood boiled, but she held out her hand to him. In her mind, she commanded lovingly, but filled with understanding. "Be ready." Falduin's eyes flashed a burst of fire as they escorted her with a gruff yank and pull. The crowd parted as they moved, and the people gasped and gawked with surprise and anger. Hatred set in, and Brené's heart sank. She had hoped it wouldn't come to this. The guards shoved her up onto the tower. Prince-elect stopped and turned at the intrusion, his eyes maddening with the interruption until he spotted her. His sister, born only 5 minutes before him, the one who had taken everything from him, his crown, his title, his duties. It was only fitting that he had exiled her, but she survived. Now he would not let her live. The guard shoved her, and she fell, spilling herself onto the platform in front of him. She looked up. Her once faithful friend and brother stood, his eyes dark with evil rage. She stood and straightened her posture, holding her chin firm, her gaze locked on his.
"Sister, what a surprise! I thought you would have died in the wastelands. Seems I was mistaken."
"You are mistaken. By a lot of things, brother."
"Well, I won't make that mistake again,"
he snarled. He stepped toward her and grabbed her wrist, yanking her toward the edge where the entire city could see her.
"Hear, hear, O grand citizens of Eladel," he called loudly. "I have once again captured the one who would bring annihilation to you."
"It is you, brother, who would bring such tragedy upon our people," she shouted back.
"What makes you the rightful ruler, huh, sister? Because you were simply born before I? What rule is that anyway? Who decided that was the best course of action? I am clearly the best suited for leadership, to be king."
"You are no ruler. You despise your people. You do not honor them."
"They honor me!"
he yelled angrily, then struck her across the face with the back of his hand. Falduin, now standing near the tower, flinched as the sting of the hit touched his own senses. His chest heated, the fire of the dragon surged, but he waited. She had commanded it. She had asked it of him. Brene spit the blood from her split lip onto the wood of the tower, then turned her anger brewing back to him. "You see, this is how you would treat your sister? Then how would you treat your people?" The crowd shifted with murmurings and hushed whispers that gave her hope. The prince-elect hit her again, this time without restraint. Her body jolted with the pain, and she recoiled, nearly knocking herself over. He laughed a sinister laugh, one of evil intentions and depravity. Brene stood again, and she held back the tears that wanted to come. She stepped to the edge. "Is this what you want?" she shouted over the distance. The crowd cheered and shouted. Her heart sank. The realization that they had fallen, not by the sword, but by hatred, overcame her. "Then you shall receive your desires, but with every choice comes the consequences. You are free to choose, but not free to decide the results." The people laughed and jeered. She stepped back and held her hands out. "Then this is your fate, not mine." Falduin felt it like a blade drawn across his spine, the moment tightening, coiling, reaching the edge where restraint became betrayal. His claws flexed beneath human skin, but the fire did not roar. Not yet. It waited. On the tower, Brene stood with her arms outstretched, blood on her lip, wind tearing at her hair and cloak. She was not pleading. She was judging. The prince-elect sneered, mistaking stillness for surrender. "You always did love dramatics," he said loudly, turning her slightly so the crowd could see her face. "Let this be a lesson." "No," she said, her voice cutting clean through the words. The single syllable carried farther than it should have. The murmuring crowd quieted enough to hear her next words without confusion. "You wanted a ruler who would protect you?" Brene continued, her voice steady despite the tremor in her body. "One who would stand between you and what you fear, and you chose him." She looked at the people. "You chose hatred because it felt strong. You chose lies because they were easier than truth." The prince-elect tightened his grip on her wrist. "Enough!" She turned her head slowly, meeting his gaze one last time. There was no fear in her eyes, only sorrow. "You were born to lead alongside me," she said softly. "Instead, you chose to become something else." Then she yanked free of his grip. Gasps rippled through the square as Brene stepped backward onto empty air. Time fractured. Falduin moved. The fire exploded outward, not in flame, but in presence. The ground beneath him cracked as his form surged, bones stretching, wings tearing free of flesh in a cascade of blackened scales and ember light. Shouts turned to screams as a shadow swallowed the square. Wind roared as a massive shape surged upward, faster than any falling body should be caught. Brene trusted him completely as her body sank toward the ground. A wing snapped open beneath her with thunderous force, catching her before the crowd's collective breath could break. The impact shook the tower. Dust rained from the stone. Falduin rose, immense and terrible. Brene cradled safely against his chest as his claws bit into the tower's edge. His wings beat once, twice, sending a shockwave through banners, torches, and men alike. Silence fell, but of fear and the reckoning. The prince-elect staggered backward, face draining of color, staring up at the dragon now towering above him, eyes molten gold, fire rolling beneath obsidian scales. Brene lifted her head, bloodied but unbroken, and looked down at the city from the safety of her mate's grasp. "You wanted a monster?" she said, her voice carrying unnaturally clear across the square. "Now look at him." Falduin's gaze locked on the prince-elect, and Brene pointed at her brother. "In all the years of my father, did you ever see the dragon? In all the years I was set to rule, did you see the dragon? In all the years of his father before him, did you see the dragon? No. Why? Because our ancestors honored the treaties, the agreements, the oaths, but your prince-elect did not. He cast me out, exiled me, made me his scapegoat for his foolish and greedy desires. Now you will pay with your choices." Brene nodded once, and Falduin released his fire breath. The force was staggering, a wild inferno, a measured judgment of fire and brimstone. Fire poured from Falduin's jaws in a vast roaring arc, not toward the crowd, not toward the city, but past them, slamming into the outer battlements where siege engines, stockpiled weapons, and barrels of pitch had been hastily assembled in preparations for a war that had never existed. Stone exploded. Metal screamed. The shockwave rolled through the square like thunder, knocking soldiers to their knees and sending banners tearing free from their mounts. Heat washed over the people, stealing their breath, forcing silence, demanding attention. When the fire ceased, smoke billowed upward, black and curling, framing the city in ruin that had not touched a single home. Brene raised her hand. Falduin stilled instantly. The contrast was unmistakable. "This," she said, her voice ringing through the stunned quiet, "is restraint." She looked down at the people, faces pale, eyes wide, terror giving way to something far more dangerous to a tyrant. Understanding. "He told you dragons would destroy you?" she continued. "And yet your homes still stand, your children still breathe, your city still lives." Her gaze shifted sharp as a blade to her brother. "He wanted you afraid, because fear makes men kneel." The prince-elect backed away another step, shaking his head violently. "She lies," he shouted, though his voice cracked. "This is trickery." Falduin's wings unfurled fully. The shadow swallowed the tower. Heat rippled outward, pressing, a reminder of how close annihilation truly stood. Brene's voice softened, devastating in its calm. "You could have ruled beside me," she said to her brother. "You could have been remembered as a protector." She lifted her chin. "Instead, you chose to be the reason the fire returned." The crowd began to murmur, with doubt, anger, betrayal turning inward. A single voice called out, then another. "He lied to us. She never attacked. He struck her." The prince-elect turned, wild-eyed, seeing the shift too late. "Guards!" he roared. "Seize them!" No one moved. Some dropped their weapons. Others stepped back. Falduin lowered his massive head, molten eyes locking on to the man who had once called himself king. "You hunted a dragon," his voice thundered, ancient and final. "And found one." Brene placed her hand against his scales, grounding him steady. "This is your last choice," she said to her brother. "Step down, face judgment as a man." The fire coiled in Falduin's chest, waiting. The city held its breath. Because in that moment, Eladel stood at the mercy of its rulers. "I won't! Never!" Prince-elect shouted. He whipped his sword from the sheath so quickly that the people barely saw it before he plunged it into the dragon's side. Falduin roared with pain, and Brene jerked from the pain racing to her brain. Their shared agony hit like red-hot spikes, and rage took over. It would take much more than a blade to kill a dragon, and Falduin slammed his wings against the air, propelling him up and away from the prince. The prince's grip on his sword yanked the blade with a downward thrust aimed at slicing the beast more. Blood gushed from the wound as he shot into the air. Brene's anger surged, and her mind shifted into something she'd never experienced before. The world around her faded under black circles around her vision, and all she saw was the gash at her lover's side. Bright white light flashed across her violet eyes, then raced from her core and down her arms. The heat eased the pain and converged on the wound, sealing it shut. Falduin's rage smoothed out, and he sighed with a thankful heart. Below, the king had surfaced from the depths of his depression to the mess and his son's cruelty. The king looked up. The majestic black dragon hovered with his daughter sitting now on his neck, together as one. He tilted his head with a nod of thanks for saving his daughter, for saving his people, for saving him, and for allowing him a second chance to make right his wrong. I, King of Elidel, hereby take back my crown from the prince, and strip him of his title, his crown, and his heritage, the king shouted. No, father, the prince yelled. Seize him, the king shouted. But the prince was too quick, and with the aid of his followers, melted into the crowd. We are done here, Brene said. You do not wish to stay? No. Brene looked down at her father, tears streaming down his cheeks, hand on his heart, and she understood his pleading. She wasn't ready to fully forgive, but in time she would. For now, she pressed her fingers to her lips, then blew him a kiss, as she had done as a child. Then, with a little wave, the dragon flew away. Where there is good, there is evil, and where there is evil, there is good. They were certain this would not be the last of her brother, the dragon slayer. And so it began, the slayer and the dragon.